Everyone sign the roll sheet. Make sure you sign the roll sheet before you. All right, let's begin. The African and healing origins of music, including jazz. Again, I'm Professor Carlisle, you know me. And Professor Estrada is my mentor as college professor in training. And Dr. Sklar is my supervisor. So welcome her again. From Cal State Bermuda's Extension College Teaching Certificate, postgraduate. The lecture is excerpted from a book that I wrote. It's called Free Jazz Improvisation, a continuum from Africa to Congo Square, from early jazz to bebop, and the return to mysticism, communal healing, and transcendence beyond oppression. So all the forms of jazz are in there, basically. Like I said, it's a continuum, right? And it began, the origins were, of course, in Africa during the transatlantic slave trade. The traditions were brought here. People were brought here, and so they brought their cultural memory. And they reinvented themselves in another place, in the Americas. And they improvised their way as a way of life, but also in the music. Okay? And the healing purposes of music never goes away. That is the original purpose. So this is what we're talking about. African mythological origins of music, song, and the drum. Credo Mutua, in his book, Endow My Children, he's a storyteller and a medicine man from the Zulu tribe of South Africa. And he talks about in his book, Endow My Children, he revealed that the African storytellers, or oral historians, like himself, are called the guardians of the Ilando, or tribal history. They are men and women who were told the history of the tribes under oath never to alter, add, or subtract anyway. Storytellers today are called griots, bards, poets, and what do we call them in hip-hop? MCs, right? The tradition continues. The storytelling is even in film, right? But always the purpose is to continue the history, the oral history traditions of Africa, and also for healing purposes. Here I have a short video of a griot from West Africa, and he's singing about the importance of the griot tradition. I'm only going to show a short snippet. He's playing a traditional instrument called the kora, which I have one of those. Okay, he's playing a kora. And that's one of the string instruments that have survived from the beginnings. It's long, we still have it today. Made with the board and the strings along with the handle. In the blues tradition, it evolved into the banjo. And it evolved from there into the guitar, and so it's in blues, and blues is the root of all the music of America, period. There's no jazz without the blues, but also the spirituals, because everything in African cosmology and in African life is interconnected. Nothing is separate. We're not separate from each other. We're not separate as an audience and performer. We're community. We're communal. Everything is interrelated. And everything is, we are non-separateness, which is a universal principle, right? So that was a bit of the griot tradition that continues and survives even in rap music today. Continue with the African mythological origins of music, song, and drum. Mythological is the oral history. That's what the scholars call it, oral history. It's true. It's true. In all the indigenous cultures, they have their own stories of beginnings. This is the beginning of the music. Africa was first, right? So, Mutua, he revealed the mythological story, oral history of the African origins of all music, its healing and transformative power, and the African origins of the marimba and kalimba instruments that are important in jazz today, and Afro-Latin and other African-derived music still today, saying it was a sound of unearthly beauty, and to the surprise of everybody, It came from the throat of marimba. She, Queen Marimba, had taken the deadly bow of the captive Maasai of Kenya and had fitted a gourd to the middle of the bow itself, transforming the deadly weapon of war thus into the first Makwayana bow harp the world had ever seen. And so these are examples of the bow harp. And some go back as far as ancient Kenya or ancient Egypt. And you see this one down here, almost looks like the berimbau of in Brazil, in Bahia, with origins in African, because capoeira comes from Africa. Capoeira Angola. Angola is Africa. And that is all interrelated. It's a martial art, but it's a spiritual tradition, and it involves the drum and the music and the berimbau and all of these instruments, traditional instruments that have been improvised or have been recreated in the Americas. Next, he says, not only had marimba invented the first musical instrument, but she was singing the world's first song as well. They joined her as the magic of the song overwhelmed them, and soon the whole settlement was singing. On the healing power of song and the origins of the kalimba or kalimba, Credo says, a miracle in the form of a song came floating through the night, air like a ghost of pure mercy and deliverance. This song had a magic spell about it. There was a musical instrument in the singer's hands, which in future years became known as the kalimba or kalimba. Okay? And these are examples of the finger pianos. They still exist. I have one. I just couldn't get to it. But the purpose of these instruments were healing. A medicine person will have that instrument and work with the person. And even you see pictures on the walls in ancient Egypt and the pyramids of people doing healings with the music, and formulas for it as well. These are finger pianos. It evolved into the kalimba, the xylophone. We call it the vibraphone in jazz. Okay, it still exists today. It's very related to the piano also, which we will talk more. I will share more about its African origins. Okay. On the African origins of music and swing, NEA jazz master, composer, pianist, author, educator Randy Weston, whom I met and who read and loved my book, endorsed it. He's in the book too. Is quoted in Jazz Times as saying, they say that early man and early woman listened to Mother Nature. And that's how music began. They listened to the sound of the thunder, the wind, the insects, and the birds. All the creatures in Africa that I've seen all swinging. Whether it was an elephant, tiger, or bird, they all had the rhythm of the continent itself. It's based upon a different rhythm than mine. It's more spiritual, and the music describes the continent. It's different than any other place on the planet. Whether you go to North Africa, West, East, or South Africa, you're going to hear variations of it, but you're going to hear that everything is swinging, because the whole continent swings. As Duke Ellington said, it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. So, you have to have that swing, and you also have the blues. If you don't have that blues, idiom blues element, you don't have it. Jazz. This is Randy Weston. This is the last time I saw him. This is when I first met him, and then here is the last time I saw him. He performed live here at the solo piano concert. And regarding African origins of various instruments now used in jazz, Harris, again Randy Weston in the book Harris, he tells us that the ancient Egyptians created magnificent instruments of art, whether it was drum, harp, or stringed instruments. Ridley and Brave allude to the fact that Africans, upon arrival to America during the transatlantic slave trade, had to adapt to playing their music in their manner on unfamiliar European instruments, or ones which they adapted or improvised. Consider now the choice of instruments made by the early jazz musicians. The regions of Africa that supplied those African people that were enslaved for the New World did not have musical instruments that closely resembled the trumpet or the cornet or the clarinet or trombone that were used in earliest jazz groups. And here you see a picture of the stringed instruments in Kemet in ancient Egypt. Okay, that we call Kemet. And here's more musicians in that region at that time from the pyramids, from the walls of the pyramids. And this is a Nubian person who is of that lineage, of that, in that area of ancient Egypt where the people who built the pyramids were from. It's that part of Egypt, what we call southern Egypt. Okay. All right, they said that, Ridley and Ray said that flutes and the xylophones were common in West Africa, but the flute wasn't used in jazz till after the 30s. So they just basically had to reinvent themselves and play in their own percussive manner, their own African notes, blue notes, the notes in between the Western scales. They did whatever they did their way on the European instruments. And down at the bottom you see, well, here's another person in ancient Egypt. One of the string instruments looks a lot like that kora, that we saw the real play. And down lower, here's a guy playing a banjo. And I'm sure he's a blues person. Early blues and early jazz was banjo. And that is an African instrument that was originated in Africa. And one of the professors that I met, Dr. JJ at UCLA, was chair at the time. She did 35 years of research on the African origins of the banjo, so it's very documented. And down below is just a group of jazz orchestras. It says they're jazzing orchestra, and it's in the 20s. And it just talks about the combination of the blues and ragtime and the spirituals and how they combined with the habanera rhythms that the Caribbean people brought from Haiti and places like that. And it all came together to create jazz. And the habanera rhythms is also African because it's Moors. The Moors in Spain brought a lot of things, brought music and culture to that region. So not only the architecture, but the music. And Moors means black. People of North African heritage. But they are also a part of this founding of our country. You'll see people with those turbans. If you look at some of those ancient pictures or old pictures of the founding in this country, you will see people that have those features. They are Moors. This country is very, it has such a rich history, even before Columbus. So, Ridley and Ray stated that, okay, we're talking now about African-derived instruments. So I've already spoken about some of the xylophone, the marimba, the kalimba, the flutes, and these are derivations of it that wound up becoming the piano and wound up becoming the guitar and even the first drum set, just basically putting percussion things together, creating a drum set. So Ridley and Ray stated that another keyboard instrument, the piano, was common, and the percussive role that jazz piano assumed, because they played it in a different way, more percussive, more, rhythmic, and more different, okay, more like a drum almost, because the drum was actually banned in the U.S. After Haiti got its liberation, the drum was banned. So people still had their way of playing. They did it with the hand. They did it with their feet. All over the Americas, they played like that with their instruments. Percussive. You can't change your cultural. It's just in you to that, you know, what you know, you're going to do. So you're going to recreate it, improvise it, right? Improvisation as a way of life, improvisation as a way of creating and reinventing yourself and continuing your traditions. And let's see. So jazz piano was transferred from, they're saying, from the African xylophone, which is, this is just an example of one, a smaller one. And the finger pianos that still exist today, they're called different names. Marimba, kalimba. I have one from South Africa that I was given, along with the kora. That was the big gourd with the stick. And some scholars today link the origins of the piano to the xylophone that the Moors, black people, brought to Spain, explaining that the xylophone is very similar to the piano in that the piano is merely a derivative of the xylophone flipped on its side. Okay, these are more pictures of those African instruments. You see how they carved the faces on them. And this is looking like a kora. And there's one of the early guitars that related to the banjo. And this is an ancient Kemet person playing a harp. These same stringed instruments are still here today. So this part, we're talking about the spiritual and healing purposes of the music. Corey Mutua elaborates on the African origins of the marimba, xylophone, and kalimba, and their healing uses since the beginning of time in Africa in the following quote: marimba, the Queen Marimba, invented many more songs, love songs, hunting songs, and even songs to sing when a beloved one is interred. That means when they're not well, when they're sick in the hospital. She invented the xylophone, which is still called the marimba to this day. People sang and whistled, and their souls were uplifted by the melodies and tunes their immortal queen had given them. For the first time since the escape of Odu and Amaraya from the destroyed land of the first people, human beings held feasts and dances and came to know again the soothing joy that beautiful tunes bring to depressed and weary souls. So he goes on to talk about the spiritual healing uses and its bending notes, which is a major element of jazz and all African-derived music in the following quotes. Thus, the xylophone, the marimba, was born. The xylophone is a living instrument which can bend its notes. And that's an element. We're going to talk about the African elements in jazz. I can make it available. Okay, the healing purposes. Okay, we're talking about the xylophone in particular as a living instrument which can bend its notes to fit the blood-warming melody of a wedding song or harshen its voice and convey to the human mind the clamor and dark horrors of war or the exciting suspense of the hunt. One can use the voice of this holy instrument to create various moods in one's audience. While other instruments speak to the ears, the xylophone speaks to the heart and soul. Today it's the marimba or the vibraphone. It's like the bells that, you know, that Lionel Hampton hits, the xylophone. As you can see, this is like a wooden one, a more ancient one. So it has special uses in healing. It speaks, it creates various moods. He speaks of mukembe, a derivative of the xylophone, and its special uses in healing in Africa, stating many of a convalescent owed his recovery to the sweet bird-like soothing notes of the mukembe, a hand xylophone made entirely of reeds. Thus, the instrument soon acquired the nickname of the sick one's comforter. So it's clearly the purposes are for healing. And he tells the African origins of the drum, each one with different uses, very important in jazz as well as in Afro-Latin drumming and percussion ensembles, both sacred and secular throughout the African diaspora. North, South, and Central America. Here is just a picture of Queen Marimba. Someone depicted her. And one of the, a drum from West Africa, a traditional, that's a sacred one. And Credo speaks of the importance of the drum and its spiritual healing uses in connection with dance, accrued to its importance to cultural memory and connection to the divine for enslaved Africans in the Americas as follows. Marimba, Queen Marimba turned the old nut grinding mortar into the first drum the world had ever seen. And for the first time since the dawn of creation, the forest shook to the pulsing beat of a drum. With the birth of the drum came the birth of a new dance. There's no drumming without the dance usually. And all these dances were invented for one reason only, expression of tribal religion, spiritual reasons, and the release of that beneficial life force dormant in every human being, but when released makes one feel closer in the arms of eternity. And in Chinese Oriental medicine, it's called Qi, the universal life force, right? And Qi in the Igbo language of Nigeria in West Africa, Qi means creative, or Chukwu. Everything's interrelated. The African is the first civilization, so a lot came from Africa and spread throughout the world. And so the drumming ceremonies are important to all indigenous peoples worldwide. Isn't that true? Yes, you have your own, each culture has its own drumming. So this is just pictures of the African diaspora. This is the continent of Africa, and the places they spread to: North America, South America, there's Central America, India over here, and yes, Australia, all over the Americas, Aboriginal people. And this is just a picture of the slave trade from the transatlantic slave trade from Africa to the Americas, and then down here, a little further, is the Indian Ocean slave trade, because there are Africans that were enslaved in India as well. They're in India now. That's why there's people that are in the south of India that are very, very dark. They're darker than me. Right? Well, Randy Weston was talking about when he went to West Africa to a Nigerian festival. That's where I was. That's where I met him. You went? Well, you met him there?
You know, that's where I got my name, the same year.
No way.
Yeah, we were in the same house.
At Fela Kuti?
Yeah.
Wow.
1977, that's what I showed you.
Oh my God, everything is so circular.
That's where I met him.
Oh my God.
That's exactly where I met him.
No way.
That's what he's talking about right now.
Wow. Okay, so Weston, he talks about that our music was different, but the same from all over the Americas and all over the continent of Africa. There were some elements that were the same. They were different, but they were the same in some ways. If you take out the African elements of bossa nova, samba, jazz, blues, you have nothing. Because you have the African elements that make it up, you guys. Okay? So it's all interrelated. African American music, Afro-Latin music, it's all connected. It's not separate, you guys. And we are one. To me, he says, it's Mother Africa's way of surviving in the world. It all comes from Africa. I want people to realize how much she's given the world. Whether it's Cuba, Brazil, Venezuela, or Jamaica, wherever our people have been taken, people discover all of our beautiful music and where it's been taken from. That's why they say Mother Africa. Cradle of civilization. So I have a picture of the African American music, but you can see African American sacred traditions, secular traditions means the religious music or spiritual music. The music that is non-spiritual is the secular. And then you have African-American secular tradition, the instrumental So down from there, you go into the folk spirituals. From there, the folk gospel, gospel hymns, traditional gospel, gospel groups, modern gospel, how it changed. Like even now today, it's more like R&B and hip hop, right? So it changed from where it was in their spirituals, from, where people coded the music to escape slavery. Go down Moses, they took the words from the Bible, but they were giving codes and directions to people how to get away. Steal away, things like that. Getting away, okay? African American secular tradition. Under that we have work songs. Remember I played a little bit of work songs where people were working in the fields and they would chant. That made the work go faster. That made the work less painful. The music is a healer. It's a strengthening power. You had arranged spirituals, but you had those work songs, the things that the spirituals before that, the chants that were African. Then you have, what is it? Rural blues, okay? Out of that, spirituals and the gospels and the work songs came the blues, the rural blues. People in the field blues, or people that are sharecropping, 1 foot out of slavery, that kind of blues. In Mississippi Delta, and then going from there out. Before they had electric guitars, where they were using that banjo, or they would just, using just a drum, a hand drum, or a tambourine or something that they created. You had vaudeville blues, you had boogie woogie, you had folk jubilee quartets. Okay, that combined with the gospel quartets, that led to the urban blues. The rhythm and blues came out of that, the R&B. Then you get into the rock and roll from there. Rock and soul music, that led to disco, rap, hip hop, funk. That led to house music, electro funk, go-go music of the 80s. Okay, then you have gospel hip hop over here, right? So it all kind of combines. And over here, syncopated bands and dance music, from going into ragtime, syncopated brass bands, New Orleans style jazz, which was early jazz bands, swing bands, then to bebop, where the musicians said, okay, no more dancing. We're just serious about our music. We need to, you need to take this serious. We want our civil rights. They went around the world and they were like, okay, when we come back here, we're fighting the wars still after all this time, and we don't have any civil rights and human rights. We're treated like second-class citizens. Respect us. Respect our music. Respect us as human beings. And that was what bebop was about. And then. And that's Dizzy and Charlie Parker and Thelonious Monk, the people that we discussed last time. And then we went into hard bop and cool jazz, which transitioned from, I'm going to send you guys down. I just didn't bebop, cool jazz, hard bop, soul jazz, modern jazz, where it became more like Coltrane, and then free jazz, Coltrane, modern jazz became returning to the African origins of collective improvisation, where all the instruments improvised at the same time, where you had African elements or Eastern elements, where people discovered music from other parts of the world, mostly from the East, from India or Africa, and they started using more percussions, and Coltrane used to use 2 drummers, and he worked with Obabatunde from Nigeria, and they started having collectives. So they went back to the communal purposes, the healing purpose of healing for community. You had people like Horace Tapscott, you had Sun Ra, you had...
Sun Ra.
Huh?
Sun Ra.
You played with Sun Ra?
Same time.
Yeah. In Nigeria? Around that time.
Same time.
Huh?
Y'all lipstick.
Oh my God.
It's like a...
Oh my God. My friends are going to try to include him out later. Okay. David Cherry, you know David Cherry?
I know that.
Yeah, down there. So jazz fusion, and then the new jazz, swing, all these things, R&B, neo soul, all these things are together. Now we got hip hop jazz, more kind of like a rap jazz or hip hop, where Kamasi Washington, you guys heard of him? He's like combining the elements, and they do, you know. So, but he's like Coltrane too. You know, he's a part of that lineage. So anyway, so I have a video on the African origins of the blues. It's like a banjo almost. No rock and roll without that. Now you heard of Bo Diddley. He's one of the great, like blues to rock people, right? Diddley Bo. Well, he created this. They named the instrument after him, and it's like people making up an instrument. And it's like they do in Africa. It's like making it up, but they're recreating African instruments, string instruments. Let's take a look at this guy. He's very famous. Yeah, even my friend, I got videos.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. So now we talk about the African elements of jazz now. The first one, improvisation, which improvisation is when you create something on the spot without planning it and editing. It is spontaneous creation, spontaneous composing, spontaneous. You know, you're in a communal atmosphere with your band members, whether you're the singer or whatever, or musician. And you're improvising, you know, and we listen to each other, which is an element of improvisation. There's like 9 elements of improvisation that I'll discuss later, not right now. But improvisation in general, it is 2 minutes. Okay, I better cut it down. It tells us that it's ubiquitous African element of improvisation that is a major element of jazz is a shared trait in African culture, stating an emphasis on improvisation, and spontaneity is further shared trait of different African musical cultures, and these have figured prominently in jazz, later jazz, and all the traditions of African American music. Okay? You go off, you start doing riffs, you